Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for one of our September professional development sessions, Posturing Towards Wholeness, presented by Dr. Tom Lenz. I'm Dr. Jessica Seaman, Assistant Dean for Faculty Development in Creighton School of Medicine. Just a few housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker. This session is being recorded, and you will have access to the recording and slide presentation for future reference. We invite you to submit any questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can by the end of the session. We do ask that you remain muted with video off unless asking a live question to assist with the recording. Also, this session is eligible for CE credit, and you'll receive the website and activity code before we conclude. There is a short survey associated with the continuing education, and we thank you in advance for providing feedback as we continue to bring you diverse and robust programming here at Creighton. Now to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Thomas Lenz. Dr. Lenz is a tenured professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine within Creighton School of Medicine. He is also the director of the Master of Science in Integrative Health and Wellness and the Lifestyle. He is also the director of the Master of Science program in Integrative Health and Wellness and the Lifestyle Medicine Graduate Certificate program. His research interests focus on well-being, chronic stress, and resiliency, and the use of lifestyle medicine to prevent and treat chronic illness. Dr. Lenz is a fellow in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and has published over 100 articles and 5 books on the topics of lifestyle medicine, well-being, chronic illness, cardiovascular pharmacotherapy, pedagogy, and chronic disease prevention. We are very grateful for Dr. Lenz's willingness to share his time and expertise with us today, and I will now turn the remainder of the hour over to him. Dr. Lenz?
All right, thanks, Jessica. Thank you all for joining. I see a lot of friendly and familiar faces, so thank you for joining in to all of you and spending a little bit of time. I thought maybe before, just to frame this up, because you're probably thinking, what the world did I get myself into with this kind of topic, of where this started. So for the last about 10 years or so, most of my scholarship and research have been in the area of chronic stress, prevention, management, and so forth. In 2019, I took a short sabbatical to write a book called Chronically American. And when I was in class with some students just prior to going on sabbatical, students said, so what are you going to be doing? And I said, well, I'm going to, write this book, and it's about chronic disease, and that chronic disease really kind of develops from, this chronic stress, and the chronic stress really kind of comes from being, American. It's really from our American way of life. And they're like, well, as students always do, they ask great questions, right? They're like, well, is that it? Because it's sort of a downer, man, because if I'm an American, what does that mean for me? I'm just, leading towards chronic disease just by way of me living in this country. And so, it's a great question, and it was great timing for it, because what it made me do was think about this in a little bit broader context, to say there's got to be something more, right? We're doing a lot relative to stress management, relative to wellness, disease prevention in general. And we're making headway, and it's been for the most part good and really necessary in a lot of ways, but it's not getting us there. There's something that's missing. And as I was writing Chronically American, I kind of, started to figure out what the situation was. Is we've got some really good stuff going on. It's just not going far enough. It was undeveloped at the time, and I didn't want to delay the process anymore. So I published Chronically American with a little bit at the end of this kind of information, but then I've taken the time since then to get into this a little bit more. So I'm writing a new book called Posturing Towards Wholeness. It's got a little bit different title, which I'll show you in a minute. And so this is what I'm going to talk to you about today is essentially, essentially the book. So, I usually don't get nervous doing these presentations, but I'm nervous a little bit today, mostly because I've got about 1,000 slides and not enough time to talk about it. This is really like a 3-day workshop, more than an hour CE. So I'm going to run through, just as a fair warning, I'm going to run through some of these slides rather quickly. I might skip over some of them, and I put a lot of text in some of the slides purposefully so you can go back and read them and kind of try at least make some sense of them, and to get a better idea of what I'm talking about here without having to cover everything in so much detail. So that's the purpose of that. So I may go rather quickly, especially at the beginning here. But so let's see here. So why this topic and why now? Or really the purpose of this is to say we need a new pathway forward. What we're doing is working, but it's not working well enough. It's not going far enough. So it's not about creating, a new means to an old end. Like, okay, so we've got chronic stress and trying to figure out new ways to meet the end of chronic stress. And it's not about, using our current stress reduction strategies to meet some sort of new end. It's about both. We need new and new. And so it's what I see it as, just a new way forward. It's moving really beyond this idea of just trying to cope with our current situation. We need to get beyond that and move towards this idea of transformation. And that is a powerful, is something that's a pretty, a lot of high energy buzzword, I guess, the transformation. And I don't think we should take it lightly. And this is anything but. So hopefully by the end of this, you get an idea of what I mean by transformation, and quite literally transformation, both personally and collectively. So this is hopefully going to get beyond us as individual and look at us as more of a whole. And I think, to be fair, to address all of this together, a conversation needs to have about the structural formation too, of what's happening within our systems, like our healthcare system or education system, in the larger corporate institutional settings. That's a conversation for a different day. So we will mostly be talking about today is personal transformation, but collective transformation of us as persons, just so you have some context there. So the title of the book really is Posturing Towards Wholeness, Our Radical Way Towards Living Well. I decided to make it towards stress today. I'm not really sure why, because it's all the same topic. But so anyway, the book is presented, it's laid out in reverse order as far as chapters go. And this is how I will present them today. So the names of the chapters are, in fact, the names that are in the title, but just in reverse order. So I'm officially renaming this talk to the same, what it probably should have been from the beginning: Posturing Towards Wholeness, Our Radical Way Forward to Living Well. Okay, so we'll start off with living well. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I think the best way to cover it, at least in the context of today, is an introduction to what wellness is not. So talking about stress, fatigue, and burnout, particularly important topic for healthcare providers and anyone who works in the healthcare setting, for that matter. It's not just the providers, but it's the whole system and all of the folks who work in it. We know that stress is, pretty established numbers, but that stress affects a great deal of the population, and accounts for the majority of our visits in the office and in chronic disease. And that's really largely from the work from Chronically American, not the original data, but just to give a synopsis of it. But then, COVID put us on a different level. We know that it made our stressed out society even more stressed out, and it particularly affected young people and people of color more so than others. And I think that's an important topic to address also. But where does our stress come from? Well, before, during, and after COVID. Well, I don't know if we're after yet, but money, economy, family responsibilities, all of the big markers that we all feel. And so, the behavior changes that have come from had to occur because of this. It seemed like it affected young people, or is affecting young people more so than olders, and particularly parents also. So looking at during COVID and well-being survey, most of the people experienced stress. So 3 out of 5 workers experience negative stress. In fact, this data is not something that's new to you, but I'm just covering as far as, complete, more of a comprehensive look here. But the point of this is to say, when we have stress that is affecting us from some stressor outside, it has a clear pathophysiology that we can associate directly, very linearly even, with chronic disease. And so when you look at cortisol due to stress response, it increases appetite, insulin, decreased immune system, telomere length, leads to obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Okay, that's the kind of if you don't want to read Chronically American, just look at this slide, because that's the context there. But anyway, so the important, I think, piece about this moving forward for us, and why we're bringing this back today, is that this doesn't affect everyone the same. So some people who are exposed to similar stressors have different outcomes. And why is that? I mean, this is the question on the heels of Chronically American. Not everybody, not all Americans are stressed out of their minds. Some of them are, a lot of them are, but not everybody is, even if we're exposed to the same stressors. So why is that? That's a really big question. And I think something that needs to be explored even further. And I don't necessarily have the answers for those today, but what I would like to explore with this topic is a path forward that everyone can take, regardless of what your experience has been with stress. So then moving onward in the downward evolution of our book here is the topic of forward. And I think evolution is the key word to this. Is we're on a forward movement, and it's something that this is where posturing is going to take a left turn for you, and maybe introduce a new way of thinking about all this business. Our way forward is a continual evolution. It's really recognizing that we're on a newness all the time. Okay, and this can be something really difficult for people that, we get a lot of comfort from being where we are, but in an evolutionary process, as we are, as in we're never finished, is sometimes, or can be, kind of a scary thought. And so we don't tend to embrace that very easily, just I think as a natural tendency. And so we try to hold on to what we've got, as opposed to letting go. And that's one of the messages from all of this business as we keep making our way through the material. But the dance that we have on our forward movement, and then sometimes our regression, or what looks like regressional movements backwards, and then forward movements again, is part of the dance, I think, of what I would look at as wellness. It's not always a forward trajectory all the time where I'm making continual advancements and I never regress backwards. I think in all aspects of our wellness, which however you want to define it, it's a dance. It's maybe 3 steps forward and then 2 steps back, and then another 3 forward and 2 back. But the 2 back should not be looked at as being something negative or regression. It's probably necessary in our overall evolution forward. So our current state of wellness is good, I would say, and necessary in a lot of the ways we do it, but it's just not going far enough. And we actually might be even fundamentally wrong in how we see issues related to health and wellness. And to not go into this too deeply, but our biomedical reductionism and how we address things like diabetes makes a lot of sense for us from a medical side, from a physiology side, but from the context of the whole, we may be missing some significant pieces for that. In the same way as our psychologically based treatments of stress. I mean, everything, we put so much emphasis on the control tower we've got upstairs. And so everything must be, if I can change my mind, then I can change everything. And I don't think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the full story. And so we're missing the boat on a lot of our stress relief efforts. And so just to pull out a quote from the book so far is our obsession with individualism combined with our lack of interest. And the relational exchange is what we're going to talk about as a key piece for this. Our relational exchange with each other and the world has led us down a path of illness that encourages stress and promotes the notion that resiliency is really even nearly impossible. So our current strategies for stress management just don't go far enough. I think we're spending too much of our attention on the thinking mind and the psychological aspects. That's part of the equation, but we're spending too much there. So what does this mean from, when I say radical way? Well, it's really not very radical at all. Radical is really another way to say having roots. It got, just as a side note, it got rerouted, I think, as something being a radical reform movement that happened in the 1800s, a political movement in the 1800s in the British Liberal Party, but that's how it got its other connotation. But being radical really means just having roots, and that's just where we're trying to get to the most basic, fundamental, rooted, lowest level of knowing. And then move forward from there. So the other piece I think that's interesting to consider here is something I spent a great deal of time on in Chronically American, talking, this is from Jürgen Habermas, who's a sociologist, but talking about this term life world. And a life world is something that it's our taken for granted way of living that we just were, introduced to as being part of an American. And this is just the way it is. Examples would be, most of the food we find in the grocery store is prepackaged, highly processed, high sugar. And we can become, I would say, complacent in saying, well, that's just the way it is. That's just the food I get. That's what I'm exposed to. Or our education system being linear and reductionistic, or our healthcare system, having the fee for service, maybe not the best model. Our insurance system, certainly maybe not the best model to provide the best outcomes. But you can look at other things like economics, politics, government, and the way that it is structured, and saying, well, that's just the way it is our life world, in Habermas's language, just the way our life is, and we become complacent and okay with that. And I think that's where health and wellness has become too, and that, okay, so we're doing really good work with exercise and maybe eating right and sleeping and trying to emphasize good relationships and spirituality and all of the necessary components. But there's something there that's missing. It doesn't seem to be good enough, not good enough. It doesn't seem to go far enough. It seems to be good, and even necessary in a lot of ways, but it just doesn't seem to be going far enough. So I think we need to explore some new ground in still looking at what is working, but to some greater depth. And that's what this whole piece is about, what this book is about. So getting to the why and the hows, certainly. And we're going to talk a lot about tinkering. And I say this in the most fondest way, because we actually have it as part of our outcomes in our program, is that we want students to be able to tinker, and tinker would be doing, little refinements to gradually move forward to make things better. But it doesn't in the way we're using tinkering now. And I would say example would be, nutrition. We're, eating more fruits and vegetables and maybe less meat and less sugar and less, processed and, sugary drinks and those kinds of things. Those are all tinkering activities. But I know a lot of people who are eating well, getting enough exercise, getting enough sleep, are absolutely miserable. And so there's something missing to that. There's a depth component that's missing to it. And so tinkering is good, but it's not taking us towards transformation. And so that's where we want to be. So maybe the most important chapter out of this book is the Hour chapter. This is relationality, or something that we're going to call relational exchange. And so the reason I would say this is a key piece to this really goes back, I think, to the experiences I've had in the past of working with patients, but then also looking at the broader context of how we fit into everything that exists. We're moving towards wholeness in our conversation here. But relationality is a relationship, or being relational with not just other people, but with nature, or you can expand that to say, the cosmos, all that exists in that way, but also with ourself, with God, or the divine, or whatever language you'd like to use there, a relationship with the present, and our relationship with the dance, the movement, the forward, the backward, this evolution that we're moving through. What does our relationship there look like with each of those pieces? And that's something to consider, because the we always seems to supersede the me in how we feel, even though our way of life, our cultural norms say this is all about individualism, this is all about what's best for you, is what's decisions and so forth process that should be. It's all about the individual. There's a lot of data that suggests we're moving even deeper into this notion of individualism as we continue to move forward. But I think if we look at this, if we stop ourselves, be a little more conscious of what's happening, I think we recognize that the we supersedes the me. And I think even going further to that, realizing that that's even something bigger than the we. It's the isness, the is, just what is of life is superseding all. So this would be, to borrow a page from Richard Rohr's Cosmic Egg, this is the story, as opposed to my story, our story, but the story. And how do we fit into the story? And that's when we're moving towards this notion of wholeness. So wellness programs and relationality don't seem to match in the way most of them fit together. A lot of them say that they're self-care centered, but most of those fit into what's best for the self, as opposed to the ego self, as opposed to something that is a little bit larger than that. And wellness programs are notorious for saying, well, if you're overweight or obese, well, it's your issue. You got yourself into that mess. You need to get yourself out of it. And that's a very, self-centered focus to this, as opposed to making this a little larger in context to say it's we-centered or it's thee-centered. So the blame and responsibility should never be put on just the individual to fix the issue. And we know this already, but we still do it. I think healthcare burnout is a great example, or whatever language you want to use around healthcare providers struggling these days, fatigue, burnout, that it's the message seems to be, you need to just buck up and fix your problem and, reboot yourself, go on vacation, come back a different person, whatever it is, as opposed to saying, we need to look at some structural issues or what are going on. But then we also need to give the tools that can help people to move in a different direction, a deeper depth dimension to what wellness means. And that's hopefully what posturing can give some insight to, perhaps. So how do you get started in this idea of relationality? It's already here. Okay, so everything that exists is relational by nature anyway. So even though we try our darndest to make things about me, an individual, everything is relational already. And we many times choose to ignore them. And so it's kind of like, I think about when I was a kid, when on the playground and the kids would be doing like double Dutch jump rope, and these ropes are swinging. and you just got to jump in. And you just got to jump in. And that's kind of where we are with this. It's a little bit scary because the ropes were moving when we got into this, this whole life thing. And to get beyond ourselves, beyond our individual piece and into the collective and the wholeness of everything, we just got to jump into the relationality. So connectedness seems to be a very, very fundamental principle to all this. And if you want to wrap some science to this, there's a lot of examples to look to on connection. I won't spend a whole lot of time here because I could get derailed with this one slide for I think the whole hour. But everything developed in that first comment on the Big Bang Theory, as we know it anyway, everything developed from a single moment. And so because everything developed from that single moment, we're all connected back to that moment. So everything that exists, as far as we can see into the galaxy now with the Webb telescope and beyond, all of that is connected back to us as us very personally as well. We're all part of that story. Looking at iron is kind of interesting too. And that elemental iron can only, I didn't know this until, a little while ago when I was starting to look into some of these connectedness pieces, but, and some of you may already know this, but iron can only be developed or it's only formed from a supernova exploding. And in our case, in the Earth case, a supernova exploded and expelled out these elemental iron and carbon and oxygen, and then through gravity it all formed together. And so iron can't be formed in Earth as we know it here. It was from our very beginning that it was there. But interesting thing about iron is that it's in almost everything. It's in the food we eat, both plants and animals. It's at the core of our Earth. It's in us as humans, as you know, that we need iron in our red blood cells to bind with oxygen, to deliver that oxygen around. So it's a really interesting story of connection. And again, why am I saying all this? We're moving towards this idea of embracing this notion of wholeness. And so I think iron is in some of these scientific things are kind of neat. The quantum physics and quantum entanglement are another great story with all of this. Over the last 100 years or so, we've come to realize that the density of particles like this pen, in fact, is our wave particles just compacted more densely, and that everything we know of are comprised of wave particles, subatomic wave particles, and some of them are compacted more densely than others. And why is this important? Well, we have subatomic wave particles that we can't pick up, at least in our conscious minds. But they exist in our surrounding all the time. This isn't something that I'm making up, by the way. This is actually proven is way back in the 50s. But that some of these particles are connected in ways that don't make sense to us in our space and time principles as we know them, because there could be two particles, it's been shown that two particles are connected at great lengths, that when one is changed, the other one changes simultaneously, and it makes no sense because of the time and space differentials between the two. So there are some kind of connection that is happening beyond really what we are fully able to understand at this point. And so I think this idea of quantum physics, and particularly the idea of entanglement, has some sort of connectedness principle that we ought to probably pay attention to in all of this. We know that through the HeartMath Institute, if you're interested in some really amazing research, that there's electromagnetic fields of energy that we emit from ourselves, and that also all living things emit into the atmosphere, into the cosmos, if you will. So all of our electromagnetic energy fields are always interacting, and we can measure them out to about 6 feet at this point with the tools we've got, but they probably go further than that. And so we have this connection energy between each of us, even between us and nature. There's reasons why we go out into the trees and we feel something, because we are actually connecting with the electromagnetic field. of energy that we're getting from nature. And then the last example I have on here is, of course, the Christakis and Fowler's work on social networks, and that we know that up to 3 degrees of separation of personal relationships. So a friend of a friend of a friend has an influence on a lot of what I do in a day's time, and I may not even know that person. So there's been statistically significant research to show that a friend's friend's friend has an influence on body weight, on politics and attitudes towards what's going on in the daily life, on happiness, in all kinds of space. And so there's something that is what they call contagion from one person to the next, that there's an influence that we've got over each other that way that we don't even realize. And so the reason I give all of these examples, I don't think we have a good grasp on how much influence we have on the world around us, on the people that are around us, on nature itself, just by what we're offering up and giving out from ourselves, and then what we're receiving out as well. And so this is all an important part of the story when we're talking about wholeness. So the relationality is then about that exchange. It's about the experiences that is at the heart of the core of life, an exchange with others, ourselves, nature, God. It's not about taking and holding on. And this is really how most of us approach life. And it's a very natural way to do it, is that we don't look at life necessarily as having unlimited abundance. We look at it as having limited resources. And so we try to hold on, and that might be hold on to something related to our ego, but also hold on to, our academic, whatever, hold on to our health, hold on to our relationships, hold on to everything. What the exchange relationality gets to is the giving away and the receiving. That dance of giving away and receiving, and the continual evolution of that dance is the movement forward. And so this is not about individualism, but more so about community exchange. It's not just about working together, something much more deep than that, I think. It's about, this is at the fundamental and radical, if you want to use that word, the radical core of experiencing health and wellness, I believe. So this is something that it seems to make sense to talk about it in a nested health and wellness way, and not necessarily in nesting dolls, but more so it's more difficult, I think, than that, because our health is affected by other people's health, and other people's health is affected by our health. So we're dependent upon each other in our health and wellness, but so is our planet. And I think we're starting to realize that in more ways than we did in the past, that health and wellness of all that is dependent upon us. And we are dependent upon the health and wellness of all that is. It's a two-way. So one is not necessarily nested in the other, but they're definitely connected. And it seems to be a way to describe that.
Tom,
so, yeah.
I already have a question about this chapter with relationality that came through. So I thought maybe we could ask this question right now.
Sure.
What would you say to people that are in necessary relationships that might be causing more stress for them? If they are trying to reduce stress and trying to live well, what about those relationships that seem to be necessary, maybe within our families, I think might be what they're talking about, or work relationships, and how would you move forward?
That is an excellent question, and getting to the heart of what we're talking about here. So hopefully this will have some kind of clarity as we hopefully we'll have time for as we get to this in the end. But part of all of this is accepting the isness of what is. But the paradox is that just because you are accepting the isness of all that is, that there's also an action that's required, or may be required also. And so both of those are necessary. And there's a bit of the book that spells out too about the necessariness of the challenges of life, of the suffering of life. And there's something very important about the suffering that moves us in a forward direction towards transformation. But moving beyond the surface of saying, I'm offended, I'm angry, this person hurts me, and why is that? Well, we're moving beyond that into this notion of acceptance of who others are and what they also bring, but at the same time, knowing what is ours to do for action to make things go in a right direction. Okay, it's a both and maybe that'll give a little clarity for this towards the end. So hopefully, I'll step up the pace just a skosh here. So talking about wholeness here, tinkering, transformation, and unitive consciousness. Again, looking at action and contemplation as being both necessary. And so we talked about tinkering a little bit already, but tinkering needs to not be our end goal. Our end goal should not be just losing weight, just getting in better shape, just having, this, lifestyle of making more money, or whatever the end goal might be. There's something more beyond that. So all of the wellness activities that we do can be looked at as saying we can take them further, and money is probably a bad example. So, but incorporating sleep, or having right relationships, or going to church, or whatever the wellness activities that we do. And hopefully this will make sense as we keep going. But the thing that is challenging for us, I think, is that we're so conditioned to think that we need to be doing something to make something better all the time, and that action is always required. The piece of this that is important is that a transformation, nothing is required for a transformation to happen. And transformation comes as pure grace. What we need to do as the action part is allow space for it. And so if we approach tinkering activities, our wellness activities, in the right context, in the right way, with the right format and framework, then we can allow ourselves the open space to be able to first recognize the grace and transformation, and then secondly, accept them. And this gets us closer to that question, Jessica, about what if I have someone that I have to have a relationship with, but that the relationship is strained, because this is such a good example and so common for all of this. So let's keep moving forward. So examples of tinkering, again, these are wellness things that we, really know and have talked about already. But a transformation just inherently means that it's not a fixed thing. It's an ever evolving way forward. It's a receiving and an exchange. It's a giving and a receiving, and then a giving back again. And maybe even more importantly, getting to this idea of unitive consciousness, unitive existence, unitive consciousness, is that there's no clinging to it. Okay, I'm not even clinging to this anxiety and anger and challenges that I'm having with this person whom I love, but I'm having a difficult time with. Right. I mean, so I'm not clinging to any of that. I'm not clinging to all of the pieces that are promoting this type of thoughts around, if you want to get to the stress. So this isn't to say this is it's just a new way of saying old language, that I'm going to squeeze a stress ball and just let it go. This is a different level of consciousness, and that's the new way forward, the new challenge forward. So here's maybe a way to explain this, is the difference between wanting, as in O-N-E-I-N-G, and wanting, as in W-O-N. So the way we usually see the world is from our binary, our dualistic, competitive, disconnected way of that someone's offending me. I'm just going to keep using that example because it's an easy one, because I'm this and they're that, and so we're not seeing eye to eye. I'm Republican, they're Democrat, or I'm Democrat, they're Republican. If I'm one, then I can't like the other and I don't agree with the other. And let's take this a step further. There's difference, seeing the difference between male and female, or anywhere in between or outside. If I'm one, then I'm not agreeing with the other. I don't see the other. I can't appreciate the other. Black, white, young, old, seeing the binariness of all of that then doesn't allow us to move forward in this unitive consciousness where we're then seeing singleness. Okay, and this is what Julian of Norwich described as the divine union, of looking at wanting, O-N-E-I-N-G, as being the very union and the connectedness action. It's seeing things from how they everything is the same and connected and together in the singleness of everything, as opposed to the separateness of everything. So then, to put this a little bit further, so knowing the good and the bad are parts of the same undivided wholeness, and to take that forward, they're even necessary, right? The bad is even necessary with the good to make the whole. And accepting and holding that tension is wanting, O-N-E-I-N-G, and that's moving towards a greater level of consciousness and this idea of unitive consciousness and what I would say living well in the definition title of the book. So towards chapter is about moving forward with intentionality. Another really important topic here, I think, and that wholeness can't happen on its own. So even though, okay, we didn't talk about this at all, but even though we inherently are whole unto ourselves, we have a true self that exists that we perhaps don't even know, but is only held with God and has just pure and true goodness associated with it, even though that is our very core. There is still something for us to do, a movement that is necessary on our part. We're co-creators with God in this evolution towards living well. And so a lot of times we, as Americans, like to do the writing. If something's wrong, I got to write it. I have to fix it. And we're very impatient about all that. So I have a not so great relationship, or this, I just have such tension with this person. I need to fix it. Well, there's part of this that is accepting what is, and then being able to have the stillness to know what the right action is to do. And that's the dance. That's part of the dance. So intentionality is a movement, not to perfect anything, but just to move in a direction of, or direction towards. And again, this direction can go backwards, and necessarily so go backwards. So striving to achieve towards something new, and at the same time accepting what is, it's both. So finally, getting to posturing, and what does this mean? This is putting ourselves in a position to receive, and this is really the point of all of this, is to do an action and no action at the same time. This is both, I think, what means by action and contemplation, tinkering and transformation. So there's an endless forms or number of ways to posture that can lead towards transformation, if they are done with intentionality and relationality. So let's just give a couple examples of posturing. These would be wellness activities: physical movement, eating, sleeping, connecting, relationship-wise, meditation, prayer, stillness. All of those are posturing activities, but none of them will go far enough unless we allow them to. And this is, one of the main points of all of this, is to say we've got wellness activities that are across the board. This group is doing this group is doing this. How do we get everybody to be, in this evidence-based way of moving forward, of everybody doing these, necessary wellness activities? And my take on this is, let everybody do what makes sense for them for wellness activities, but do so with intentionality and relationality. And this is what more of it looks like. So a key piece to this is being able to know in ways other than through your intellectual. The only way we feel like we know anything is by studying it and reflecting on it and thinking about it. But we know that we know ways. We know we know in other ways than just thinking about it. Of course, we know by tasting, so using our senses, our movement, our balance, when we learn to ride a bike, the rhythm we've got, all of it, we know something by just through our physicality and our even our physical centers, our movement centers, but also emotionally. And this hopefully isn't going to get too out there for you, but this is not our emotion as in our feeling emotional, like happy or sad or whatever, but it is sensing the vibrational energy fields that surround us. And before you say I'm out there too far, I know you know this already, because we've all been walked into a room and you could cut the tension with an air, you cut the tension with a knife, right? The what's in the air, you can feel it. There's something that you can feel without words being exchanged. So there's vibrational energy that can be tense, it can be heavy, stuffy, frantic, nervous, anxious, it can be light, calm, cool, bright, enthusiastic, so that's another way of knowing and picking up on that and being aware of that is important in this wellness movement forward. So what's the posturing pattern? As I guess I would say, there's ground rules in that. The purpose is to put yourself in a position to receive. And by receiving, I mean the grace, so that we can move forward towards transformation. The challenge for this, it's a gradual process. This isn't something that we want to, as in our way of doing things, make it a quick response. It doesn't feel good, I want to make it go away. The better approach to this is being okay with what it is, and moving, resisting this idea of I need a quick response or achievement. And so the how do I know that I'm moving forward? Well, because in the same way that that you love something, or that you're falling in love, and if you're asked to explain, I just know. How do you know this person was the right one for you? Well, I just know, right? So you're moving towards this when you are. And I think very importantly, you never fully arrive. I think it's important to realize that the goal is not to achieve transformation. The goal is to move in the direction towards. Not enough time to talk about it today, but this idea of stillness is really important with this. Having dedicated time for stillness is important for this. I don't know that it's necessary, but it certainly is really important for all of this. And that would be time where you are, by stillness, I mean not even thinking or doing anything. You set aside time. It looks like nothing at all, but it's a very important something, where you can sit quietly, and when thoughts come in, you just passively let them go. That type of stillness time is really important, to pull all of these pieces together and have all of the centers of ways of knowing work synergistically. And so this would be having the presence and openness without the thinking, reflecting, and so forth. But I think those could also be incorporated into activities like walking and being present to what you're doing there too. I think that's also possible. So what are the steps? There's only two. One is having intentionality, as that's moving in the direction of wanting. I mean, it's just wanting to be there, wanting to move in this direction. That's all. I mean, that's the first step, is I just want to go in this direction. Really, really important, this intentionality. I'm going out, I'm just going to use an example, walking as my wellness activity. I want to move toward transformation, as opposed to I'm doing it so the dog gets out and exercise. I'm doing it just so I can increase my heart rate, get more fitness. I'm doing it so I can lose weight. Being more conscious of it than that. Wanting the relationship, whatever it is, to improve. That's the first step. Okay, having the intentionality. The next step is being aware of the relational exchange. Okay, so because you are inherently part of the whole, there is this continual exchange that most of the time we're not aware of, at least consciously not aware of. We can get ourselves to be more conscious of that. That's a movement towards this relational exchange. So how are you giving away? So in this relationship, how are you giving away, as opposed to What are you holding on to? How and what are you receiving? And then again, how are you giving back? That dance, that backwards, forwards relational exchange of whatever wellness activity you're doing is a movement towards transformation. It is putting us in a position to receive. So we just don't want to use our minds. We want to use, our other ways of knowing, and again, resist the urge to make a list of all these, I'm having all these exchanges while I'm walking, I'm doing all. It's not a competition of seeing how many exchanges you can make. It's just being present to those that you can be conscious of. So accepting the good, the bad, the ugly, and welcoming it as part of everything. And again, back to the relationship, and we can all relate to this on some levels of whether it's a work colleague or family member or whomever, of having challenging relationships and welcoming it and welcoming the feeling that happens to be associated with it, and then finding the space to let it go. It doesn't mean that you're accepting. Okay, that's the paradox with all of this. It doesn't mean that you're accepting. This is the contemplative part, and the action is also there. Okay, so what is mine to do in this situation? So not holding on to anything, including those feelings, and don't making it a serious part of your identity. I'm a victim. I'm a professor. I'm whatever. Not taking any of that too seriously. So that's a big piece. So let's use walking as an example, so we can kind of at least have a little bit of time for other questions if they are. So let's use walking as our example of wellness and our posturing activity. So are you being intentional about moving, from simple walking, simple tinkering towards transformation? Do you want to go in that direction? Do you want the relationship to get better, if you want to use it in that simple sense? And so that's the first step. And I think it's an important one. And we can bypass things. Well, of course I want my relationship to be better. Of course I want to be more conscious while I'm walking, or whatever. But do you? Do you? And this is an important first question. Do you have intentionality of your movement forward? Can you sense the connection with nature? So this is for walking, with nature, with the pavement, grass, rocks, dirt, whatever you're walking on, with your breath, with the rhythm of your movement, with the energy field that surrounds you, with your thoughts. Those are just some examples of places where the exchange can take place. And then I think most importantly, start this, what are you giving away in here? And again, this is not the hard part about understanding. This is not a cognitive exercise. This isn't just where you think about this. I'm thinking about how I'm thinking. This isn't that. This is something where you're using your other ways of knowing, incorporating all of that together. What are you giving away? What feeling are you giving away? What are you receiving? And then again, what are you giving back? This is the dance, back and forth. Are you holding on to anything? That you're clinging to something you're not able to let go? So this is taking, again, our existing wellness pieces and then incorporating this new way of thinking about them. And so lastly here, knowing begets knowing, that through our posturing activities, greater clarity evolves, especially if we incorporate this notion of stillness. The clarity, it looks like nothing, it feels like nothing. You may think nothing's going on. Something is going on with regular practice of that. And so I think this is what living well means. So then without, saying conclusions, because there really aren't any, this really isn't a conclusion, that everything presented here, I feel like is really unfinished. Some parts, I think, even more than others. And there's no real conclusions, I don't think, to any of it. And that's the difficult thing for us to wrap our heads around, is how do I know? You know, and it's just a movement forward. Jump in to the double Dutch and start dancing and move. You'll know when you're moving in the direction. And so a new way forward demands a new path. I think this is where we are sitting, a new way of living well or managing stress or whatever you want to put there, demands a new understanding of ourselves in relation to others, to ourselves and the cosmos and to God. And I think this is important to look at both on a personal level and on a collective corporate level as well. So wholeness, here's a few of the paradoxical must-haves, I think, is that we're already whole without our need to achieve wholeness. And I think that's important for us to realize that we cannot, but here's the side of it, is that we are already whole, but we cannot fully be whole until we realize that we're only part of the whole. Everything is included, the good, bad, and the ugly. It's all one continuous, unbroken connectedness. So yes, we're whole unto ourselves, but we can't really be whole unless we realize that we're only part of the whole. And so those paradoxical things, of course, you can't reason out in your mind. They don't make sense. You just got to let them sit and soak. Accepting what is and working to change it at the same time is required to understand what is ours to do. Another, again, a really tough one to sit with, but it takes time. Stillness is the nothingness action that is required. And if there's one thing that I would say, if you can take from all of this, is incorporate some kind of stillness into your life. And I would, anyway, that I think that's, well, enough said on that one. And then continuing wellness activities, but with intentionality in relationality, just as we've talked about. Okay, so I kind of made it to the end with only a couple minutes left. Sorry. I knew that was going to happen. So have any other questions, Jessica, that I can?
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And because I know you just a little bit, I know that you already live this kind of wholeness and you already practice this kind of posturing. And so I appreciate that about you. We do have a couple questions already. And the first question is, when is your book coming out? When is it going to be published?
So the book should be done in January, should be ready in January.
Okay, very soon. A great way to start the new year.
To go.
Another question that came in is, I have an elder family member with strained relationships with most of the family due to his short temper and pride. He always needs to be right and always needs to be in charge. Based on some of the concepts that you shared, what can I do, specific things that I can do to help him improve his relationships with the rest of the family? Are there things that I can do?
That is, man, such an important question. And I have answered this question and thought about this question so many times. And unfortunately, so you can divide life into two halves. The first half is when you're, really, trying to achieve and make sure that you have all of these identities of who you are and building up this person that you want the world to be, and always want to be the person who is separate, superior, in charge, control, all of that business. And then there's the second half of life when you just let it all go because you realize it doesn't matter. Sooner you can get to the second, and this isn't an age thing. It doesn't happen when you're 50 and live to 100. It can happen when you're a teenager. And unfortunately, it can happen all the way up to the moments just before death. And so the sooner we can get ourselves to the second half of life, and this is what we're talking about, this is posturing to get there. Okay, but to answer the question more specifically, how do I do this? Well, the first thing I would say is do the work yourself. Do your own posturing, because when you're in that space, you are doing more than what you realize. Our writing reflex to say, I see how unhappy this loved one is. They're suffering because they're trying to control everything. They're angry, they're bitter. This is really common, by the way. So this isn't just directed at anybody, but and I want to fix it. I want to make them happy. I don't want them to suffer so bad, because I can see them suffering, in their own skin, and they don't realize that they're making everybody else miserable. First thing you can do is your own work on this space and putting yourself in a good place. So you are going to, if you're in a good place, then it's gonna be out there, more so than what you realize to others. Okay. The thing that you can't do is to say, give the directive, you need to change, right? But is to have the relationship, approach the relationship in the softest way that you can. And from your own standpoint, letting go of your own need to be right and your own need to make everything, most of us want things to be, don't like conflict and want things to be evened out. Letting go of that, because it's going to happen, but letting go of your need for that and just being there in the isness, the presence of the person is really important, because you're going to, as crazy as it sounds, emit this electromagnetic energy that is more calming. And we know through research, and this is, beyond our conversations today, that two people can have coherence together in their heart rate variability, which measures some of this electromagnetic activity, that if you bring that presence, then the other person is going to more likely to meet you, even though they're got jagged, wavelengths going. You may have real smooth wavelengths. And if you can stay there, then that person can smooth. This isn't happening overnight, right? This is a gradual process. And so my best advice is for you to do your own work. And that, I promise you, is going to translate, transmit, transfer in some way over. You may not ever solve it. And that's the thing, is we want to solve the problem. You may never get there, but there's going to be movement in the direction.
I love that. Really putting the onus and the responsibility on doing our own work is super important. So thank you for that. Well, Tom, we are out of time. Thank you so much. And I thought there was a couple great questions that you were able to answer. And if anybody has any other questions, Dr. Lenz did share his information with you, and you can reach out to him directly. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you so much, Dr. Lenz, for sharing your knowledge.